Hey guys, before we jump into this episode, I want to tell you about this killer place I found called Frost and Float. So a while back, I busted up my shoulder. It was hurting so bad. I had all kinds of crazy inflammation. So I look into some cryotherapy, and this thing's pretty legit. I go into Frost and Float, totally takes the inflammation down. It's like some next level icing. It helps so much. I went in for, I think, a total of 3 sessions. I have full mobility back in my shoulder. I'm out surfing again. I'm back to my training. This is pretty rad. I'm so stoked on Frost and Float. If you give them a call, check them out on their website too. It's frostandfloat.com. If you let them know the Lazy Teacher sent you, you purchase a 60-minute float session, and they're going to throw in for free a whole body cryo session. That's a $65 value right there. I mean, they're straight hooking you up just for listening to this show. Check them out. It's frostandfloat.com. This place is rad.
This is a Lazy Teacher podcast.
Welcome back to the Lazy Teacher Podcast. My name is Brian Pulowski. This is episode 23, Classroom Brew. In this episode, I talked with a host of one of my favorite podcasts right now. The podcast is called Classroom Brew, and the host is Ryan Michael. The premise of the show is pretty awesome. He has his guests come in, and they sit down and have a drink together, and they just kind of vent. They talk about education and what's going on in school, and it's pretty rad. Ryan's just an all-around awesome guy and a definite friend of the show, and he will certainly be back. So without further ado, here's Ryan from Classroom Brew. So what grade do you teach?
So I'm right now in a high school. So I've got sophomores, I've got juniors, I've got seniors, the whole 9 yards. How about you?
Yeah, right now I teach kindergarten, so I'm going to bump up to probably 2nd grade or maybe 4th grade next year. So yeah, this will be killer. We're going from like the high side of teaching and the low side of teaching.
Yeah. Well, it depends on, so like a lot of my kids are probably reading at a similar level to your kids, unfortunately, but that's one of the struggles. Oh yeah, it's been a struggle. There's a handful of kids that I have in my quote unquote honors class, and they're reading at like a 3rd or 4th grade level. So if you've got a kindergartner that's a little bit above grade level, or if you just give them a year or two, they're going to be right about where my kids are at.
Well, that's interesting. So how do you have kids that are in honors classes that are reading at a 3rd grade level?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a huge issue with programming. It almost feels like they just throw kids into whatever class works, regardless of what's going on. I mean, part of it is there should be that opportunity for all kids. It looks good, and it's also good for kids if they have the chance to earn that honors credit, to see what an honors class is like. But obviously, if they never made it to a standard, they're going to struggle at that level. That also goes for any other class, whether it's honors or regular. It's just a whole issue of, are the feeder schools actually preparing our kids for success at the next level?
That's so interesting, though. How do you, I'm still confused. How do you have middle schoolers that are coming into high school at a 3rd grade reading level, and that's considered honors?
Yeah, that's a very good, and I'm confused by it too every single day, especially when we get looked at as if we are the problem at the high school level. Like, why aren't your kids performing up to standard? Why aren't they meeting that benchmark that everyone else in the state has? Why are they struggling on the SAT? They're looking to us, but we're just trying to get them caught up. We're not so much worried about, we are worried about the SAT, but we're just focusing on, let's get them to where they should be. And then we can start to talk about competing with everybody else to try to go to a great school after high school. It's kind of a mess. I think that there's some sort of institutional issue that's going on that they don't seem to want to address. But as a high school teacher, it can be pretty disconcerting and frustrating. And
well, absolutely. I'm glad you're just as confused by it. I mean, is that, I really don't, I'm so ignorant to maybe out of state education, but is that maybe typical in your area? We service, minority students as well. I don't know if that's the kind of area that you're in, but I just couldn't even imagine in our high schools that a 3rd grade level reading would be considered honors.
And I'm honestly not sure where the problem actually lies within, but it's definitely something that I have to really think about in my day-to-day practices. I can't just give one, let's say I'm doing a document analysis because I teach social studies. I can't just give them one document and say, all right, ready, go. I have to provide different levels of that same document so that kids can kind of work on the same type of task, but they're being met at their level. It's a real struggle that I don't think I'll be able to solve it, unfortunately, I guess I can call myself a half-year teacher so far. I'm almost through my 1st year. So.
Oh, no kidding. This is your 1st year teaching?
Yeah. I kind of put that an asterisk on that because I was teaching in a psych facility before then while I was getting my undergrad. And then once I got my graduate degree, that's when I got my license and all that stuff. And I can kind of work toward that.
So you're only halfway into your 1st year of teaching. You have a long way to go.
Yeah. I guess it's a good 1st year because I get to really, emphasize differentiation. I think I'm lucky that I'm in a high school setting because I think if I was in a middle or elementary school setting, there would be so many other principal with an LE types of things I have to teach kids. Whereas when they're at the high school level, they kind of have that foundation. So like you said, you're in a kindergarten, right?
Correct. Yes.
So like, I don't even know what a day-to-day would be like in your classroom. Would you have like a full day or a half day class, or how does it work?
That's a really good question. It depends. So specifically for kindergarten, we have a half day. So we call them early birds and later gators. Okay. So our early bird, yeah, right. Yeah, that's cool. So our early birds are 8 o'clock to 12:30, but the later gators come in at 11 o'clock. So from 11 o'clock to 12:30, there's an overlap of all 30 students.
Right.
Then when the early birds go home, I just kind of rinse and repeat with the later gators. But ideally, the later gators are kind of higher than the early birds, if that makes sense. The curriculum can be pushed a little bit further and it can be taught at like a deeper understanding than the early birds. Typically, the early birds come in and they don't really know their letter sounds, letter recognition, number recognition. You know what I'm saying?
Sure. That's the design they had, but does it actually work in practice? Are you actually getting those kids that should be in the later gator program in the afternoon, or is there some overlap where you're like, oh, this is kind of a struggle, or oh, maybe we should work on switching this so that you're being challenged a little bit more?
Yeah, exactly. So what happens is at the beginning of the year, we do assessments with all the incoming kindergartners to kind of just get an idea of where they should be. So parents bring in their kids and then we sit down with them and see just the basic stuff: number recognition, letter sounds, rote counting, just simple stuff like that. Do they know their colors? And then from there, we just do like a basic assessment and then we put them into categories. Like, okay, this student struggled. They didn't do any type of preschool or transitional kindergarten. So they're low in the foundational skills. So we're going to put them in as an early bird. And so, yeah. So to answer your question, does it work? In theory, it does work because we get to decide the classes and there's flexibility. We can move students up and down and say, I think this child will probably benefit a lot better if they were an early bird because the curriculum is going to be coming at them a little bit slower. Mm-hmm. So we're in the third trimester right now. And the idea is that the early birds should be at a point where they're caught up to the later gators. And for the most part, they kind of are, which is good, but any kids that are going to get retained or stay back in kindergarten are definitely early birds. They're not going to be your later gators.
Sure. And then the hope is that, so like, let's say they have to repeat that kindergarten year. Did they switch into the later gator thing, or do you have some that they repeat the early bird for a second year? Has that ever happened?
Yeah, sometimes it does. Unfortunately, they just did not get enough. Just repeating kindergarten, they're going to be doing the early bird program again. So they'll get assessed again, just like they would every new coming kindergartner. I guess it's not unfortunate, but it almost seems a little unfortunate to me that they went through the whole early bird program and then they're going to do the early bird program again. But sometimes I guess that's just what they need. You have to do whatever the students need. But Ideally, you'd want them to go into the later gator program because they're already familiar with it.
Right. Kids don't have to go from early bird to later gator, right?
They don't have to. No, most students stay where they're at. So
do you have any kids that, like, let's say you did like a longitudinal study of a kid that was in later gator versus early bird? Is there like a long-term effect of this kid that was in later gator, so he's performing well at the high school level, whereas the kid in early bird, he had a much harder time trying to catch up? Or is it really just getting that foundational basis down, and then once they get into elementary and middle and high school, they're good to go?
Yeah, that's kind of a good question. I don't know that there's a study that goes into it as far as into high school. Certainly just into first grade, though. A lot of the later gators just retain their information, that what they've learned better. So they enter into first grade more prepared. The early birds are fine as well. They just don't they start off a little bit slower than the later gators did.
Okay. And I wanted to ask about the actual podcast title, but I had like one last question. So like I was in the early, like the morning classes as a kindergartner, but we didn't have like an early bird and later gator program. It was just depending on your parent's schedule. Could you fit in the morning class or the afternoon class? And so I wonder if there's any kids that, let's say they fit into that later gator program. Let's say there's a parent with some scheduling. Has that ever interfered with the trajectory that you think a student should be on versus a parent that's sitting there and saying, you know what, I cannot put them in the afternoon program because I can't get a sitter for that time? Or does that ever come into account?
It happens all the time. A lot of parents aren't happy really with their kids' placement. Mm-hmm. Well, they're flexible. Typically what we'll see is parents that don't want their kid as a later gator because the early time works best. Sure. Because it's easier. It's kind of easier for the later gators to be an early bird rather than the early birds to start as a later gator, because a lot of the later class, they're already ready. They already know their letter sounds and numbers and all that when they start the kindergarten year. So we just kind of get going. Mm-hmm. And if a student's never been exposed to any of that, it's kind of a struggle for them. So, my highest kindergartner right now is an early bird, just because his mom couldn't get him to school as a later gator. And really the only issue is behavior at that point. They just need to understand that a lot of the early birds are going to be a lot more immature when they start off the school year, just because they're not used to being in a classroom setting. They're not used to being social around 15, 16, 17 kids at one time. Right. So they just need to understand, like, if there's a behavior issue with your child, it's not because of their academics. It's just they're among other kids that just aren't used to academics where your child is. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Does that mean you encounter, if behavior is an issue, is there any sort of, if you have that 11 o'clock to 12:30 overlap between the early birds and later gators, do you have any like social stratification where like, oh, that's an early bird kid, or oh, he's one of the later gator kids? Is there any of that metacognition between the kindergartners where they can kind of identify? It's like, for context, my school, it's a high school, it's a public neighborhood school, but we're connected to a charter. And that charter has like a little bit more resources. The building is a little bit nicer, even though it's connected to our school. There's this clear division where it's like, oh, they're a kid going to this high school, or oh, they're going to that charter. So they can kind of rank each other. Does that go on at the kindergarten level?
I don't know that they notice. They certainly know which class each other's in, but I'm not sure they really comprehend that it's based on academics. And very truthfully, it's based on academics at the beginning of the year.
Right.
A lot of the early birds could mesh right in as a later gator at this point in the school year. I mean, we're third trimester. We only have 2 months of school left. Most of the early birds and later gators, they're right around the same.
Right. They're those inches, they seem like a lot to us, but really to get them caught up, it sounds like it's a little bit, since they're so malleable, you have a lot of room to work with there. At
that age, it's tremendous growth in kindergarten. And that's really one of the most rewarding things about kindergarten is their growth. It's so neat to just to see how much they've changed from the beginning of the year to now.
Right. So how long have you been teaching then?
This is my 15th year.
Okay. So you've got some kids that they're well beyond their years in the kindergarten class. So you can actually see that impact, like at a tangible level. That's got to be awesome, man.
It is pretty neat. I started teaching 4th grade and 5th grade. I did that, bounced around 4th, 5th grade. I looped 4th and 5th grade for a couple years. I did that for 11 years. And then these past 3 years, I've taught kindergarten. So I went from 5th grade all the way down to, the bottom level of kindergarten.
Sure. Yeah. You have to be versatile.
Huge change.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Yeah, it was a change. I kind of needed it. You kind of find as a teacher, there's some teachers that can park in one grade level for years. I can't do it. Mm-hmm. I need to move classrooms. I need to change grade levels. I need to change it up. Like the curriculum I don't know if it gets boring, but I get too used to it. Once I find myself starting to feel like, I'm just winging it rather than putting my best effort into it, that's kind of the time where I feel like I got to move on.
Right. Have you ever found that you feel like you have to kind of be a little more versatile to like maintain your job status? Like I know some teachers my sister, for example, she taught 3rd grade for a long time. They said like midway through the year, hey, you're probably going to teach 2nd grade next year. Is that okay? And she basically had to say yes. That way, I mean, granted, you have a certification to teach all elementary, and do you feel that you still have to kind of adjust to maintain not just your sanity so that you feel like you're doing new things all the time, but is it also part of the job market? Because I know that that's been a struggle in the Midwest, is teachers that aren't able to get a job, and so they have to kind of bend to what the jobs are asking for.
Oh, really? Yeah. I hadn't really considered that. Like, as long as I've been a teacher, it's pretty flexible. As long as you're dedicated to the district, because ultimately that's who we work for, is the district. Mm-hmm. They help you out. There's not a whole lot of you're expected to move around or change grade levels. You get asked, I suppose, but you can easily say no. There's a big union front, at least here on the West Coast. You guys have like strong unions?
Oh yeah.
In Chicago?
Oh yeah. The CTs. Okay. It's really strong, but actually my sister, she's actually not in, CPS, but there is still, that presence. But I know sometimes there's only so much that they can do. But that's encouraging, though, that you have a union that's going to say, you know what, we'll back you up if you say, no, I want to stay where I'm at.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, I don't know the exact like union rules behind it, but there's something to the effect of they have to give you some sort of notification ahead of time. Like, I'm not sure, a couple months ahead of time. Sure. Halfway through the year, they have to let you know. And I think once you've been involuntarily moved, I think there's something like 2-3 years until they can involuntarily move you again.
Okay. That's good. So some protections.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned your sister was CPS. I think I know CPS different than what you're saying. CPS to me is Child Protective Services.
That's the number one thing. No, what I mean is Chicago Public Schools. That's definitely the big. And some people say, you know what, they should probably find a different acronym for one of the two, because it's not a good look when you say, I'll give CPS a call. And when people are like, oh,
exactly.
Shit. So your podcast is called the Lazy Teacher Podcast, and I've listened to a couple episodes. There's some stuff that I'm not sure if you're going for a comedic spin, but it's pretty entertaining, man, I have to say. I gotta ask though, why the name? What's like the format for your show? If you were telling people that you're trying to grab as a new audience, what would you say?
Well, I mean, kind of the catch is it's dedicated to teachers and parents of school-age children kind of just with topics of education, positive lifestyle choices type of thing. Like, I don't know, like the show's really only been around since early November. I'm only like 22 episodes in. I'm kind of just still getting my feet under me to figure out where I want to go with this. Like, if you look at my episodes, some of the episodes are, 5 minutes long. I have a couple episodes that are well over an hour long.
Yeah. That's the toughest part, man. I had a few that my first episode was an hour and 20. I tried to maintain that hour to hour and a half thing because I know some people, they drive for a long commute. But lately, like since 2018 hit, I'm trying to get more in that 30 to 40 minute range. But I've dabbled in the 20 minute, something like that. But you said you tried 5 minute episodes?
Yeah. See, I'm kind of just being flexible, and I'm really going on what like my listener feedback is. So I have an email, and whenever like I get feedback from my listeners, I really try and adjust it. That tended to be one thing that I was hearing a lot of is my solo episodes where I'm just kind of ranting about things or just talking, topical education. I was hearing, shorter is better. And I was okay. And, there's a podcaster that I just really admire. And he had said that to me too. He's like, shorter is better. Cut. Always cut the fat. When you're editing, cut the fat. Like listeners want to hear it, but what sounds good to you, they just want you to get to the point, get in, get out. Sometimes they want to be teased. A 5 minute episode can feel so much better to them than like a 20-minute episode, even if it's full of like killer content, because after 5 minutes, they're like, wait, what? It's over. I didn't want it to end. So I don't know if I'm getting that, but that's kind of the goal. That's what I'm shooting for.
You could even shoot for, let's say you had somebody in your studio with you, you shoot for like 45, 60 minutes, but then you cut it up into 2 parts. And then it's a nice little cliffhanger. I love doing that.
Yes, you've done that, and you totally hooked me on that one. I can't remember what her name was, but you did a 2-parter, and I listened to that, and it ended, and it was like mid conversation, and it ended. And I was like, wait a minute, you can't do that to me, Ryan. What are you doing, guy? So you got an extra download right after that because I jumped right into because I do have a long commute, so that was perfect.
Well, good. I'm glad it's working. I don't think I have quite the same amount of like feedback or like listener engagement. I'll get the occasional email or like Facebook message, but that's good though. You're listening to what the audience wants and you're adapting.
Yeah. What kind of outreach do you have for your listeners? Do you just have email for them to contact you?
Yeah. I mean, we've got Instagram, we have Twitter. So it's just at Classroom Brew. And then there's a simple Gmail they can contact. A lot of people reach out through the Facebook page, which is awful for me because I'm really bad at checking Facebook, but I try to kind of respond within like a day or so, preferably within like 5 to 6 hours. But that's typically where people will reach me is through Facebook. I always announce like, hey, if you want to reach out, here's our email, here's our handles on social media. There's hashtags. A lot of people, they're content to just kind of listen, maybe write a rating or a review or something like that, and then they're good.
Yeah, it's tricky. The thing about social media is you just have to be out there, so you're doing Facebook, you're doing Instagram, Twitter, like trying to get out there and reach as much as you can. But like you said, that's hard. When they respond to you on one social network that maybe you're not checking frequently, then you're like, pickles, I missed that one. Because they like to hear back from you right away. I found, even if you just give them a thumbs up for their response, like all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, I love this. And you're like getting more feedback. You're like, oh, okay. I see where you're going with this.
Yeah. I did have one though, where there was one listener, his name's Mike. And luckily he was also in the Midwest pretty close by. And he actually had a podcast as well. And he said, hey, would it be cool if we did an episode together? And so he came over to my house. We recorded an episode. So that was probably the most outreach I got. And the cool thing is that he decided, you know what? I'm going to pick up my podcast where I left off because he hadn't done an episode in a while. And I think he got back into a regular schedule. That was a great feeling to know that he wanted to be on and actually do an episode with me. And then he took it further and started using his show again as a platform to, talk about what he wanted to get out there. It's a great feeling.
That's excellent. Yeah. That's really excellent. It's kind of hard, because I find in the beginning, you find yourself looking at the stats and thinking, how many total downloads do I have? And, has it gone up? Has it gone down? What day is the best day to put it out? What content? And you can get so wrapped up in the numbers, and I just really don't know that ultimately it matters, because in the end, it's just numbers. And I don't even find myself really looking as much as I used to look. Now if I get a message from a listener or I get a voicemail from a listener, it means so much more to me than the numbers. I get way more jacked up on those comments.
Yeah, exactly. Of course, I will still catch myself on launch day, just kind of checking out, seeing, all right, how's this episode doing? But after a while, you kind of let that fade into the background, because if you check that every single day, or I know some people, they check it every hour, it seems like, you're going to drive yourself crazy, because
you're going to drive yourself crazy.
There's so many algorithms out there that kind of put indie podcasts down. You can't get too caught up in it.
But you're right though. Launch day, I'm shot on launch day. Launch day is Friday for me.
Okay.
I'm like all day. I'm like on every social media I can think of. I'm posting, I'm commenting, I'm hashtagging. I'm like trying to get back to everybody. Like I'm checking my stats like every 5 minutes.
Yeah, I'm the same.
But that's just launch day.
Yeah, that's just launch day.
I've narrowed it down to 1 day out of 7. So that's not too bad.
Yeah,
do you feel that your podcast has helped your teaching at all?
There's a lot of schools and districts that require in your monthly lesson plans where you have your day by day, they have a lot of sections where you have to reflect, which is good. I've kind of found myself reflecting more so when I'm having a beer or two with my buddies on the podcast. But in terms of improving what I am doing currently, it definitely makes you more cognizant. But that's just me. Have you found the same thing for you, or? Yeah,
a little bit. The show kind of came around just because I wanted to just start like ranting and talking about education. And, I like it. I mean, it's good self-reflection. I think, as I look at the name of your show right now, Classroom Brew, I guess it is similar to mine in that I don't want to say it's like anti-teaching, but it kind of goes contradictory a little bit. Like, the organized teacher might have been a better name for my show, but that's not me. You know what I mean? I just think like when you compare yourself to any teacher and you see like what other teachers are doing, I can't help but feel lazy. I'm like, geez, Ryan's doing that in his class. I'm not doing that in my class. Like, man, he's just nailing it.
Like you have colleagues that really
that's kind
know
of where
about
it came
it.
From.
I'm kind of hesitant. So like my show, we don't do anything negative on it. It's just literally I get some teachers or some people related to education. We just sit down and we have a beer and we chat with mics in front of us. But there's still, it's an explicit podcast on like iTunes and Stitcher, iHeartRadio, all that stuff. But I've kind of found myself hesitant to open that door to like, hey, Principal so-and-so, would you like to listen in or maybe be on an episode? I think there's only 2 colleagues I know of mine that I've told about it, and one of them was on. I don't know. I feel like because of the nature of the show, I'm a little bit nervous. I think eventually that will kind of go away and I can kind of erase that anonymity a little bit. But it does make me a little bit nervous at times. Yeah,
tell me about that, because I have noticed that I think you guys only use first names on the show. Am I right about that? Kind of,
and more so it was to protect like anonymity of students, because occasionally we'll get to a story like, this student got into a fight and I had to have a moment with him and say, hey, you got to be doing X, Y, and Z to make sure this doesn't happen to you. So it's really just to like, if we said, hey, we're going to John Smith Academy or something like that, I feel like it would be a little bit controversial if, let's say, a student is looking up at their school and they see, they're talking about these types of things, because it's not in a negative way, but you still want to maintain that anonymity.
No, you're right. Early on, I did an episode called Field Trips, and we had just gotten back from a field trip, and immediately I had 2 parents come up to me afterwards, and you mentioned that there's helicopter parents, that, and were you talking about me specifically? And I was like, no, not at all. Like, in the back of my head, I'm thinking, well, I wasn't talking about you specifically, but I guess you kind of are one a little bit.
It's like, this is a great segue. Let me just chat with you a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. Now that you bring it up.
No, and I wasn't even thinking that way. I was just thinking if someone recognizes like, oh man, that's definitely about me. You're kind of you're having parents that they're taking a generalization. Like you probably even said, I catch myself saying this all the time. I'm not thinking about anyone in particular. I'm just thinking in general when people do blank.
Yes. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just pushing my show. I love my show. I don't think I'm doing anything wrong. I'm certainly not saying anything negative. So I have like a professional Instagram account that I post my episodes on occasionally. I don't put everything on there, but occasionally I'll put an episode on there. So I do get my own parents that follow, and I'm the admin for our school's Facebook account. And every once in a while I'll put my stuff on there just because, I'm talking education, and a lot of times I might be interviewing someone that works at my school or works in my district. I talked with the lady that runs our English language learners program for the district. Like, of course I'm going to post that for the school. Like, that applies to parents. It applies to like everything. So, I don't know. I'm not hiding the show. Right. And I do get parents that come up to me and ask me questions about it. And I, just try and be honest. Like, I'm being vague, but if it sounds like it applies to you, it might apply to you. But I wasn't talking specifically about you.
If you have to ask the question, then you probably know the answer. That's what you can say.
That's kind of it, Ryan. Like, yeah, if you're thinking it's you, it might be you.
Well, have you ever thought about having parents on?
I actually have. Okay. I have thought about it a lot. I have a parent that this is her 3rd child that I've had in my class, and she's just dynamite. She's a rad parent, and all her kids have been really cool, and she'd be a good parent to come on. And then right around like that school school shooting that happened in Florida, I had a parent of our school reach out to me, and she works in mental health and offered to be a guest on my show to talk about her side of, or her perspective of it. So yeah, I have. Awesome. What about you? Have you ever thought about having a parent?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, it would be interesting, no doubt. I think for now, based on our format, we're going to stick to people, colleagues that I've had or buddies of mine, things like that. I would honestly, it would make it way easier for promoting if I could kind of blur the lines of anonymity, but I'd be open to it. We'll just have to see, where things go. Maybe I can kind of test the waters with some more colleagues and say, hey, did you know about this? Or would you want to be on this podcast I have? So I guess we'll see.
Now, do you just stick with only people at your school? Or I don't know that I can't think of too many episodes where you've had, I just can't tell you're drinking. I'm not saying you're supposed to be drinking, but isn't that like the premise is you're sitting around having a beer together and drinking? It
kind of fades to the background because we don't want that to, dominate the show. I know I've got my nice little logo with the bottle in there, but it's really just kind of that, if you could sit down and have a chat with a teacher, have a beer, what would you talk about? And that's kind of where it really goes. It's kind of, you could almost say it's that honesty that you're truly getting. We also don't want to be belligerent. That's kind of a slippery slope.
Oh, for sure. That would be horrible.
That's one of those times when you're just like, you know what? I got to throw out all this audio as I'm editing through it. But no, we haven't had too much of that, which is good.
I wanted to ask you about, you had the department chair, Mary. Is that your department chair that you had on?
Yes, that is absolutely my department chair, which a good couple of episodes. She was really open about it, but yep, that is my department head.
That was actually a really good episode. I was way into that one. You come up with the craziest names though.
Oh, for the episode titles?
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, those are a good time because there's always something that sticks out when you're talking or in post production. So you got to have something that kind of hooks people and gets them interested because I feel like and we kind of flip flop between the comedy category and the education category, but you really got to be careful so that you don't just fall into that trap of, in this episode, we're going to talk about differentiation, and you just want to keep it a little bit more fresh, especially because we are a little bit more of it's an interesting niche, I should say, for Classroom Brew. It's a little different.
I like it. Like you said, you kind of just bounce around between, there's the comedic and then there's also the serious side of it. And that's really what I try and do too, is a little bit I don't want it to be so targeted that it's only teachers because you're excluding a lot of people that could enjoy an education podcast. You know what I'm saying?
Right. And
I want parents to be able to listen.
Yeah. So on one of our early episodes, another interesting title, it was called Airdropped Porn. But someone did a review of that. It was one of those indie podcast review places. And they said you can get kind of lost in the educational lingo, but it's still kind of, and then they went on. And I kind of took a step back and said, you know what, maybe I should take a moment to have that person saying, oh, Ryan, what does ESL stand for? Just so we can kind of take that step back because for you and me, it's something we say every single day. We can talk about it endlessly. But for somebody else that they're like, you know what? I would like to see what a teacher says when they have a beer or two. They don't know what those things mean. So we have to kind of take that step back to make sure that we aren't alienating the audience.
But, it's easy just in post-production, just, make a drop where you just cut all of that out and say, so it gets really detailed here, but essentially what she's trying to say is this, and then you cut to the point where she's just explaining it. You know what I'm saying?
Right. That's true. I never thought of, and there's times where I might step in post-production, the editing version of Ryan instead of the host version of Ryan. But that's definitely something I might look into doing more, either for the sake of making things more concise or simplifying, or just saying hey, this is what this actually means so that people don't get lost.
Yeah, that's kind of my goal is just, I'm trying to do that, cut the fat. Every time I sit and do posts, I'm always thinking, cut the fat. What can I trim out that it doesn't mean that much?
Right.
I don't know if it's going to be beneficial or not. I mean, me personally, I like long podcasts. I don't mind rants. I don't mind when the host bird walks and gets into something that's completely off topic. I don't mind, but this guy was telling me shorter is better. They're going to download them. They're going to want more. You want them to want more and more and more. The worst thing you can do is bore the listener. Once the listener's going to get bored, they're done. They're going to turn it off, and they might not come back.
Right. Exactly. That's the number one fear, right? Well, what do you think, Brian? Should we leave a nice little cliffhanger for everybody else, and maybe we can do another pod swap sometime soon?
Yeah, dude, I would love to do that. It's been awesome talking with you, Ryan.
Yeah, you too. It's been great. If we want to check out your podcast, where can we listen to that, and where can listeners engage with you if they want to reach out?
Yeah, probably the best way to reach out for the podcast would be to go to the website. It's just thelazyteacherpodcast.com, and through there you can hit up all the episodes. But I'm on all the social media under the Lazy Teacher Podcast: Facebook, Insta, Twitter. Leave me a voicemail. Those are pretty awesome. I'm going to start putting those into my podcast. My voicemail is 619-TEACH-51. All right, your turn, Ryan. Lay it out for us, brother. How can we get a hold of the Classroom Brew?
Yeah, I'm much lazier. I say you can just give us a quick Google, but we're available on iTunes, iHeartRadio, Stitcher. We've got a quick SoundCloud and YouTube page, all those great places. You can always reach us at facebook.com/ClassroomBrew or at Classroom Brew, no spaces, on Instagram and Twitter. All those great places you can engage with us. We love to hear from you. And if you want to be on the show, that's always fun too. We've had that happen before.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Oh, also, I want people to be on the lookout for the Teacher's Lounge. That's another educational podcast that is rad. So between the three, I'm really going to be pushing your show, the Teacher's Lounge, and my show, because I haven't heard a whole lot of education podcasts that I enjoy. They either get into like the super dork, like college professor level, or
Sure.
It just sounds like echo in your kitchen. So
Okay. Yeah, I'll have to reach out. I think I've listened to a few episodes, but I'll have to reach out to her so we can do a nice little triad right there.
Yeah, right on. All right, cool. Hey, well, this has been a Lazy Teacher podcast. I appreciate Ryan coming on, and we're just been doing some podcast swapping with the Classroom Brew. How about it, Ryan?
Yeah, it's been good. And again, thank you for being on, Brian. It's been a lot of fun. For those of you that listen in every week, thank you for the support. Make sure you rate and review. And as always, class dismissed.
Well, that's it. You made it. I want to give a big shout out to Ryan at Classroom Brew. Really appreciate him taking the time to hook up with the Lazy Teacher and do a little swap cast. You guys really need to check out his podcast. It is pretty legit. You can access it pretty much using any podcatcher that you want. Just search Classroom Brew and you'll hook yourself up. Also want to make a quick mention of Frost and Float. If you guys haven't hit this up yet, you are definitely missing out. Go to their website, frostandfloat.com. Make sure you mention the Lazy Teacher and they are going to hook you up. Hey, it's been a while. I haven't heard from you lately. Shoot me an email, Brian, Brian, at thelazyteacherpodcast.com. It's always awesome to hear your feedback. I really appreciate it. You guys could also leave me a voicemail. If you haven't called the voicemail line, now is a great time to do that. It's 619-TEACH-51. 619-TEACH-51. Well, that's it, guys. I really appreciate you guys spending some time with me. It's been awesome. I hope you got what you came for. See ya!